This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good looking friends. As if Meghan Markle is not in our faces enough, she's got to torture us some more with another authentic interview. As if Meghan hasn't had the chance to tell her truth, here Meghan is in Harper's Bazaar December issue on the cover looking like a man. I don't really understand what the theme was, but it's very androgynous and not very flattering. In fact, it's god awful. I guess Meghan is trying to rebrand herself now as some kind of high fashion model. It's literally been nonstop with this woman in our faces from the beginning of January. Last week, we had all that drama with the Kardashians, and now we have this nonsense that we're dealing with on top of the stupid trailer that dropped. Yeah, I'm at this point where I think Meghan enjoys irritating people like this by shoving her face everywhere. I'm not really sure what the point is, aside from pissing people off, but that's what it's doing. So Harper's Bazaar puts Meghan Markle on their December 2025, January 2026 issue, accompanying it with an exclusive interview, giving Meghan another platform to tell her truth. After reading this article, yeah, I would chalk this up there to being like the cut 2.0. All I can say is that what Meghan has been doing is not normal. So either she is spiraling out of control or something else is going on, which I suspect it's both. Like, I don't think Meghan looks good at all. In fact, she looks sick here. But I also think there's something else that's happening in the background that's very familiar, and I'll talk about that towards the end of this video. But let's get through talking about some of the things that Meghan decides to offer up in this go-around. Now, there's nothing really new that Meghan offers up here, or anything that's shocking. Of course, Meghan loves talking about Meghan. And, she has zero self-awareness, and that's pervasive throughout the entire article. But what we started to see is, Meghan shaping the narrative once again to this image of her being this kind, compassionate humanitarian who is now all of a sudden this girl boss, and this emphasis of her being really, really smart. She likes to tell people that she was the nerdy one. She doesn't want people to know that she was the slutty one. She wants people to know that she was the smart one with brains, because now she's running this so-called as ever whatever, and she's a founder, so she can't be slutty. She has to be smart and brainy so she can, be on the same level with some of these billionaires that she's trying to sucker into investing into her company. So, Meghan is doing Meghan. You see, if Meghan wasn't in our faces 24/7 for the last 7 years, then maybe once in a while these interviews coming out wouldn't be so bad. But the fact that it's like every year Meghan does 2 or 3 of these interviews to tell her truth, because we're all so stupid and can't understand what's inside her head, she has to continue to keep doing these interviews, whether it is to prove to the world that she is all these things that she keeps talking herself up to be, like this girl boss, this humanitarian, this, founder. Oh, and can't forget that she's a mom, even though for the first 5 years she never talked about these children and have doubted that she even gave birth to them. Only when the threat of the titles being taken away is when she starts talking it up about how she just loves being a mom. Anyway, the piece itself was overall friendly. It was a bit lukewarm. There wasn't any type of real intellectual conversation going on here with Meghan and this journalist, who I will talk about a little bit later. But, all throughout, very superficial, and Meghan trying to sell the world about how she's like so loved and adored by her husband, as if she is the center of his world. And no matter what, he will always have her back. Now, I find it really odd that in this article, Meghan says nothing about her feeling the same way or, being there for Harry in the same way. It's almost as if, when people have to tell others how much somebody loves them, it's probably the opposite. And, the fact that she didn't say, it's just a very weird thing to say. And I think it is, because it's not true. And she's trying to keep this facade of this happy, lovely, awesome life that she has. I mean, clearly looking at these photos, she doesn't look well. She looks literally soulless. The other thing, too, throughout this piece, she's trying to make the reader think that she is some type of intellect. I mean, Harper's Bazaar actually called Serena Williams to get a couple comments from Serena about their dear friend Meg. And what does Serena probably prepped to tell them that she is so smart? She's like a genius among all the friends to make her look like she is of equal caliber. I mean, it's pretty pathetic as you go through it. And what's interesting too is that she talks about being a mom and how she is the one who is like going to books and using apps in order to mother, as if she's like some pioneer on being a mother. But, she's literally telling the audience that, she has a very different parenting style from her mom, Doria. Now, Doria, we haven't heard from her in God knows how long, and this article makes no mention of her childhood growing up with allegedly her father. This is why all of this is pure garbage to keep us distracted, stupid, to try and get us to forget about the last 5 years, and it's not working. But there is a reason for why she's doing it and why all of this attention, as well as money and effort, going into getting the world to forget about the last 5 years. I mean, you notice Meghan doesn't talk about Black Lives Matter. We don't see her doing any more photo shoots with the Afghan women. We also don't hear them talk about mis and disinformation. Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this a couple times that I don't find it a coincidence that since Donald Trump got into office, there have been no fake international royal tours to countries where USAID money had been flowing abundantly under the Biden regime. She's shifting the narrative again and trying to make her into something that whoever the powers may be want her to be. I do think in some way this is a recalibration, because the first version of Meghan Markle, the one that was supposed to be this liberal and this big time influencer to where all of these social issues, money was going to be flowing into their Fugazi Foundation, and they were going to be riding high here in the United States. But that didn't pan out the way that they wanted it to, because the work that they were doing, such as the censorship, fell to pieces once Elon Musk had bought over Twitter. And that was because prior to that, they were able to control the narrative, especially here in the United States. Remember how long it took the United States to catch on that Meghan Markle was this diabolical creature. And what we're seeing with Meghan and Harry right now is this laying low mode. Now, I'm not talking about Meghan laying low per se. I mean, she is in our faces 24/7 with garbage. I'm talking about the political activism that they have been doing this whole entire time that they've been here. It's almost like this year, Meghan is not involved with any type of activism, only at the state level where she knows she could probably scrape some funds, right? Like the fires, I mean, literally finding any type of natural disaster and figuring out how Archwell can show up and do good. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You see, the globalists don't actually believe that Trump is a dictator and a fascist and, the next Hitler. They really don't. The reason why they call him all of that is because they're mad that Donald Trump cut off the tap to the U.S. taxpayer money that was going towards the forever wars that, wasn't actually going to helping. It literally was going into foreign pockets. They're mad that they cut off all that money for the DEI bullshit. They're mad that they cut off all that money for the climate bullshit. They're mad that Donald Trump cut off all the money for all that illegal migration bullshit that was ultimately wrecking this country. Now, here's what I'm thinking is happening. See, for the short term, Harry and Meghan's Archwell Fugazi Public Charity will be aligning more with European causes. I think that more money will be sent overseas. That way there's no transparency, and Harry will be aligning with the UK and European countries to siphon more taxpayer dollars, because even though the United States NGO network is about to get blown up, The EU and the UK are doing exactly the same thing with the theft of the taxpayer. This is why they have the open borders. This is why they're pushing on this climate shit. This is why they're continuing the war. It's because they have these NGOs and the public-private partnerships, the World Economic Forum, whole Fourth Reich, in stealing and redistributing the middle class as well. This is what's happening. And I see Harry going over to the EU and the UK a little bit more often, spending time with the so-called charities because, yeah, he has a life of service, but really getting aligned with that network in order to keep the funds going. That's what I'm predicting is going to happen unless the IRS, closes in on them and shuts them down. That's where I think they're going to get their funds temporarily until the European countries and everybody else in the whole world trying to get the Democrats back into power so they can open back up the USAID and continue back stealing our money. And I do think that this is where this is heading. And we're starting to see people become a little bit more aggressive in focusing on the midterms because that's important. Right now, the United States Congress has control with the Republicans for both the House and the Senate. In 2026, when midterms happen, they're looking to change that. The Democrats want back in. They want to have some type of control. And that's because of these foreign countries who want the tap turned back on to take our money. So you're probably saying, what does that have to do with this interview that Meghan did with Harper's Bazaar? What this article is telling me, at least this is the impression that I get, is that the left is not throwing this woman away. And we see that in the continued support of all of these liberal leftist media outlets that continue to keep pushing the bullshit propaganda and narratives that are being drilled into our heads, even though we all know it's a bunch of lies, as well as the opportunities that Netflix continues to give them, as well as back them. I mean, Meghan is running this shell of a company called As Ever Whatever, and I guarantee that when the midterms come along, that company will be no longer. I guarantee Meghan will be on to something else. That advocacy of controlling the internet is still going on, but it's going on quietly behind the scenes. Meghan meeting the right people, how she does. There's a reason why Harper's Bazaar, which is a biased leftist publication, made Meghan look like she was androgynous, couldn't tell whether she was male or female. And that's because the left supports the transhumanist agenda. I do believe that Meghan has been heavily involved with the deep state and is an asset for them. It's the only explanation that I have for all of this propaganda that has been wasted on a daily basis for this woman. And the leftist liberal media that is controlled by the deep state has just been going along with it, parroting whatever it is that Meghan is saying of the day. I mean, people are actually now regurgitating the stories of Meghan being around for the LA riots when we know that the story has had like 4 or 5 versions of what actually happened, which tells me that it didn't happen. And again, we go back to what are the characteristics of a psyops? You can't have this many inconsistencies and lies and then people just ignore it, like the media just go with it and not challenge it unless something is going on. Now, I do think that there is some method to this madness with Meghan always copying and trying to be Diana. I think in a way it is psychological for Harry to trigger him in certain ways to control him. I also think that the deep state has plans or has been trying to get Meghan to a place where people see Meghan with this type of influence that Diana had. I do. I think that in their minds, possibly they saw Meghan as someone who was going to, eventually, after getting into the royal family and causing havoc to tear it down, then she would move on to becoming president, God forbid, or, some place in the government, senator, whatever. But I do think that they were grooming her for that and trying to associate Diana-like characteristics was the idea and the plan, but now it's just cringe. Meghan has ruined any chance of anyone seeing her anyway in any shape, form like Diana. The only way for that to happen is if they get control of the online space, which is why they're all so desperate to lock it down. You see, these nutters, they truly do see themselves as the ruling class and do want to enslave all of us. They do. What I see with Meghan, it's almost as if, every rebranding is like a reprogramming. We've seen Meghan go from this ingenue to then being this royal and then wanting to be this social justice warrior and then being some, podcaster and then trying to be a mom. And now she's doing this Harper's Bazaar and pretending that she's some type of entrepreneur and founder. Like, you have to have a level of psychopathy here in order to jump from one thing to another and piss people off and it not affect you. So, could she be MK Ultra? I think there's a possibility. And the reason why I believe that this is part of a deep state recalibration of Meghan is because of the writer. The person that they chose to write this article is not some amateur journalist. Caitlin Greenidge has written for practically all the leftist woke media outlets like New York Times, Time Magazine, you have HuffPost, you have Yahoo, Elle Magazine. I mean, all of them push propaganda for Meghan Markle. But they also push the propaganda for the left, especially when it came down to the Hunter Biden laptop story, and promoted the Russia hoax, all in collaboration and coordination with the US government. You see, what's special, though, with Caitlin, this writer that did this interview with Meghan, is that she is a radical leftist. Having the opportunity to read some of her work and look at some of her tweets, it's safe to say that Caitlin Greenidge is very much a race baiter and, is of the mindset that white people are evil, especially Donald Trump. Every comment that she has made deals with either defunding the police or, keeping borders open. I mean, we're talking about a democratic socialist communist right here. So reading this article, I can understand why these little jabs that she threw in there was intentional. You see, Meghan was not holding up her end of the conversation, and I'm going to show you that in a second. Everything that this woman writes about or posts about talks about race, especially Black people being oppressed. So it's surprising that in this article, nowhere does she talk to Meghan about being Black. And there is one indication where I do believe this woman does try to have this conversation with Meghan, and Meghan doesn't engage. Let me show you. Where it's highlighted in blue, Caitlin writes, I point out that when women in the public eye are multidimensional, they tend to get a lot of flack. Why do you think that is? Meghan asked me. Here, I launch into a tangent about our culture's deep and historical distrust of women's voices in public. You know what I mean? I finally say. Meghan deadpans again. Well, yeah. And that's it. I guarantee that Caitlin probably was telling Meghan about being a Black woman in the United States and, how hard it is and blah, 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 victimhood story, right, of being oppressed. And, Meghan just sits there and is like, well, yeah. And then continues back on talking about herself. This is eye-opening, in my opinion. And it now totally shifts the tone of this article because I don't think Caitlin was very impressed, especially since Meghan has all this privilege. And now she's like witnessing Meghan walking into a room and they're announcing her. And Meghan is like walking ahead of her and, mentioning all these other things that are just so superficial with no real depth. I really do think that this writer expected something totally different because back in 2019, she was obsessed with Meghan and the tabloids. And then in 2021, when that Oprah interview dropped, she was all behind Meghan. She did this interview for a book that she had published. And one of the questions was asked, we have to talk about Meghan Markle and your reactions to her recent interview with Oprah. So Caitlin responds back and says, I love that Oprah brought every bit of herself to it. And I love how unguarded Meghan and Harry were. But I don't think there was anything in there that a person of color would be surprised by. Oprah knows racism exists, but in asking Meghan and Harry to walk her through why things happen, she set things up to walk multiple viewers from multiple different experiences through Meghan's words about her own experience. You have a billion-dollar press corps dedicated to telling you your dysfunctional extended family is fine. You should be able to deal with it. What gets lost in there is the question of Archie's skin color. Those questions happen all the time for anyone who has had a biracial child. Those questions were happening at the same time as the questions about his future security. That's not poetics. That's not a metaphor. That's colonialism 101. Throughout this interview, you could tell that this journalist was not impressed, especially when she brings up the topic about immigration and ICE taking over the cities. All Meghan had to say about what was going on with the illegal migrants in the city is that LA is resilient. And that's all she says throughout it, but proceeds to talk about the LA riots. According to her father, allegedly didn't get to experience those riots. So, yeah, who's lying now? Chances are both of them. What I gathered from this and what we see time and time again is Meghan is very laser focused on 11 to 12-year-old girls. And I don't know if it's because she recognizes that they are vulnerable. I mean, she even says it in this article that she sees the vulnerability. To me, I find that very predatorial. She knows that they are impressionable, and that's what concerns me because she is not a good role model. She is not somebody that young girls should be looking up to. In fact, Meghan gives me like Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell vibes. Truly, she does. But anyway, getting back to the article, the second to last paragraph, of course, Meghan slips in talking about Gloria Steinem. And I think that that was an interesting choice, considering throughout this article, she has been focused on the impressionable tweens and talking about her being this girl boss and really setting herself up to be this role model for them. And it's interesting that she lies about her relationship with Gloria Steinem and how she met her. In fact, in the beginning of 2020, let's remember, Meghan called Gloria up and they were cold calling people to get people to vote, helping the Biden regime. So, this story and bullshit about how they were hunkering down in the same pod for COVID is bullshit. Or, maybe the other story about Meghan getting together with Gloria because she just called her up because Gloria lived in the neighborhood is also a lie. I do believe that they were brought together by the deep state. That's just my opinion. But in any case, there's a reason why Gloria is brought up here. And, I do think that this article was backed by the deep state to get Meghan recalibrated and back on track. But it's interesting how this article ends. So Caitlin goes ahead and writes, the house is quiet. The streets outside are too, because of the storm. When I walk to the door, I turn and can see Meghan turn back to the kitchen, illuminated by the green light of the rain-soaked garden, ready to move on to the next thing. That's it. She doesn't say that Meghan wished her well or sent her on her way with some of that jam. Remember, she gave Allison P. Davis from the Cut article, I guess, a basket of jams and preserves. She also did that for the Variety article that she did, Wild About Harry. But for some reason, she just turned her back on this woman and walked away. I don't think that this woman really cared very much for Meghan after this encounter. I think her view and perception of this strong Black woman who married into the royal family was all a farce. And you can see the little digs throughout this article because Meghan no longer represents Black Lives Matter. Forget it. Meghan has abandoned that ship. She's on to something else, which I do believe this is what the deep state has her doing, which is focusing on the young girls and women and getting the lockdown on the information online. That's really what Harry and Meghan have been focusing on. And for now, they're going to be laying low. Meghan's going to pull more of these bullshit stunts, and we're going to have to suffer until hopefully the DOJ steps in and, hauls them down for questioning about their involvement here with the United States government. That's, on my Christmas list this year. Hopefully Santa will come true with that. We'll see. But we have Meghan now recalibrating. And this is the impression that I get from this article. Was this a success? No, because people are not seeing what I think ultimately what she wants people to see her as, somebody that can be taken seriously. This whole thing is a mess. The whole photo shoot, she just looks, that much more self-absorbed and vacuous than she was before. I don't know how much more empty she can get, but nobody is fooled by this nonsense. But they're going to continue to keep shoving her down our throats because I guarantee the people that are behind her have endless amounts of money to sink into this disaster. They're going to do everything that they possibly can to get us to like this woman. And I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen with us, but who knows? With those tweens that Meghan is working on, perhaps maybe that's what she's looking to do. They are tomorrow's voters. But what do you guys think about this? I know all of you are sick of her, just like I am, and I cannot wait for the day for her to just go away and be peaceful, to leave us alone. That's it. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think she literally is just getting started. And I think the Democrats are just getting started. Keep your eye out. Remember what it was like in 2016 and as we led up to the election in 2020. Think about what was going on. Think about the things that were being talked about. Think about what was happening online. Think about the censorship. We all have to stay alert because there are signs that they're trying to do it again. So that's all I have for you and my thoughts on this colossal hot mess that came out in Harper's Bazaar. But part of me feels like this is more political than anything else. Obviously, the world does not see this woman having any kind of talent or anything to offer, but for whatever reason, the people behind her are putting her on the cover of these global magazines for all to see. So there's a message there, especially with her looking like a trans boy. But that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? Definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
Such a fraud.